Start? All right, here we go. All right, welcome to the first ever edition of East West Wrestling Connection. Did I say it right? Because I keep screwing it up.
No, you didn't. It's East West Connection Wrestling Podcast.
East West. Okay. I'm representing the East here on the East Coast up in Cobleskill, New York. And of course, my partner here, John Sig, out on the wicked West Coast. That's right. As we mentioned before, we're going to be breaking down both Nitro and ECW Hardcore TV. There was no Raw this week because of the dog show, which that happened quite a bit back in the day. It's amazing.
It could have been tennis. They did that too. There was,
it was tennis.
U.S. Open.
Okay.
So it could have been one or the other. Either way, it doesn't.
So I could see tennis, but it was always kind of weird to me that Raw got bumped since they were like the number one show for a long time, higher than Monday Night Football ratings and all this stuff. But somehow they got bumped for a dog show about, what was it, once a year? The Westminster Dog Show or whatever?
Like bi-yearly. Yeah.
Okay. So that's enough talk about the dog show. I think we were going to do a segment on that, but maybe we should save that for the next time they get bumped. Right. So, let's go right into the Nitro, September 4th, 1995, the very first Nitro.
Right, for sure. They had it from the Mall of America in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I think that was Minneapolis, right? Yep. It was a cool venue. The mall aspect was different at the time because they were filming so much of their stuff from the soundstage in Florida. So it had a really unique look. You saw, like the crisscrossing elevators, the escalators, and fans just packed around the whole place. So I thought that was cool. Our announce team was Bobby the Brain Heenan, Eric Bischoff, and Steve Mongo McMichael. Kev, what do we think about Mongo McMichael here on the show?
Oh, my God. He was quite possibly one of the worst I have ever heard on prime time, the big debut. Did they ever try him out before they stuck him on the show? I mean, he was horrible. He was absolutely horrible. It was like he had never had a mic in front of him before. All of his jokes came across like really corny. Some of them didn't even make sense. I was just like, Oh, God. I was so happy to hear Bobby the Brain Heenan's voice come on because, I mean, that guy's gold. You know that.
For sure. Bobby saved any segment he was in because Eric was just a monotone announcer. He didn't have his NWO persona yet, so he was just bland. He was.
I still liked him as the. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. No. I still liked Bischoff as the Tony Schiavone type guy. I mean, I don't think he was horrible. He did his part. But Mongo just really sticks out, and I hope as we start going over these shows, it would definitely be obviously more interactive for you guys to go back and watch. And before we even roll right into the show with our first segment, couple quick shout outs to my Uncle Mike, who kind of had me watch an old Nitro back from I think it was '98 at the Nassau Coliseum. It was just before we went to the Coliseum for a live Nitro. But anyway, we went back and watched that, and I know you and I had talked about doing something like this. So quick shout out to Uncle Mike, and also a shout out to Ref Tony. Ref Tony's trying to get us on the up and up with the technology. He also has his own podcast that he's a part of in the sporting world. Big Eagles fan down there. He's in North Carolina.
I'm not sure.
Oh boy, Tony. Hopefully, when we do the live feed, you can comment. But But anyway, shout out to those two guys before we get rolling into the show. So our first segment here takes us to a kind of a classic WCW match, Liger versus Pillman. What did you think as far as this matchup went? As far as these two for the opening Nitro first ever match?
Definitely. I think since you were in front of a new crowd and a new time slot, it was awesome for what it needed to be. But for what those guys were capable of, it was actually a little sloppier in parts than it could have been. But overall, it's an awesome match, awesome opener to what Nitro was going to be. Really set the stage well, I thought.
I thought they picked the two best guys to do it as far as the Cruiserweights were concerned, and this would become a staple for them. And a big part of why I became a fan of the show was a lot of their shows, pay-per-views did start with the Cruiserweights, so it was always fast-paced action, getting right into it. But with these two guys, I know Pillman, they said, was coming off of an injury. He looked a little pudgy. He looked a little slow. It was a decent match, but I remember a pay-per-view with them from maybe a year or two before that was like, a 5-star quality match, where this was kind of, 3.5, so, but it was still a solid opener.
Right. If you knew what they were capable of, you knew there was more potential there. But overall, it hit all the marks, I thought. And you know, we go from quality something like that to Pasta Mania. We had a segment with Hulk Hogan and Jimmy Hart in the crowd, or no, actually in the mall. I guess they actually had an actual storefront, like a restaurant storefront for Pasta Mania. It was essentially the George Foreman grill of pasta. I don't ask. Hulk Hogan in 1995 was the red and yellow still what it was supposed to be, or was it corny and was it time to hang up the tights and maybe switch to the black and white? You know, we're gonna get into that sooner or later. But Pasta Mania was questionable. I think it was too corny to have gotten over, even though it looked like the crowd was eating it up. I don't know.
Well, say your prayers, eat your vitamins, take your vitamins, and eat your pasta. You know, it just kind of went together really well. You know, it was a great slogan. And of course, myself having visited the Hogan's Beat Shop, Hogan has come a long way since his entrepreneurship here with Pasta Mania. I don't remember this at all from watching it, but it definitely came across as pretty corny. And he even, you know, threw in some, you know, classic Hogan style promo along with Pasta Mania brother. And there was like 100 brothers in there, and it was it was definitely not the best Hogan promo.
No, sure. And at this point in his run, he was kind of like lost, like where he was going. I don't know. He was the champ, but he didn't have anybody he was facing yet. I don't know. It was a weird transitional point in WCW for sure. So
yeah, definitely. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, took us to Sting and Ric Flair for the U.S. title. In the middle of the card, Sting and Flair U.S. title. Was that the right placement for them? These guys, I don't know.
Well, I think they definitely should have been on the show, being the two probably biggest, most successful WCW stars of all time. There was only 3 matches on the whole card, and I guess if you're going to have the champion as the headliner, as you have Hogan later, and the Cruiserweights are the open, so I guess you have to stick in the middle. I thought it was kind of a classic match between them. It's another kind of like the Liger and Pillman match. It wasn't the best, but a lot of other things that went on in the match that kind of took away from the match too, I thought. Especially we see Lex Luger come down, not even like maybe 5 minutes into the match, we see Lex Luger, which is a big deal because Lex Luger had just come from WWF, where his run was kind of seen as a failure, I guess, or is kind of seen as a mishap. You know, they tried to push him as the next American hero, Hulk Hogan figure, and it just didn't happen.
Right. But it was still a big get, regardless of the improper push, or you know, whether or not it was his fault, or you know, they pushed him in the wrong role. That's a different question, but it was still a huge get because he was a main event guy, whether or not he was over or not. That would be like AEW picking up Roman Reigns right now. Like, yeah, the booking was questionable, but he's a top guy, period. And they
especially with his history there.
Sure. They had spent the latter part of '93 into '94 and '95 trying to get Luger over. So just because it was a failed experiment doesn't mean the TV time wasn't there. It was a big get for sure. And like you said, you know, with this pass from WCW on top of that, it was huge. It was a huge deal to see him walk out and just stand in the crowd. Just what were his intentions? What was he gonna do? You know, it was a good time to see things picking up. It was a good score for Nitro there.
I agree. So this match had a lot of surprises in it, and a lot of returns or debuts even. Like we saw Arn Anderson come out to the ring very shortly thereafter Lex Luger, and the match actually ended in a DQ by Arn Anderson, who was attacking Ric Flair. That was kind of a weird, also a weird point where Flair would be.
Right. At this point, they had split up the Horsemen. Eventually, they'd end up reforming soon after this whole thing happened, but they're pushing Arn as a babyface and teasing whether or not they were going to join back together. Poor angle, in my opinion, never needed to happen. But it is what it is, and that's what we got out of it. So, but
following, go ahead.
It's more confusion in with this came a Scott Norton promo. And Randy Savage really putting him over. I thought if this was the way they had debuted Scott Norton, there was a ton of potential. So I think Norton was a failed experiment with the way that his tenure continued after what could have been an interesting debut. They started it off well, it seemed.
Yeah, it was rather an intense promo from him and Savage getting in each other's face, and they actually said that next week that they will be squaring off. So when we take a look at next week's Nitro Week 2, it'll be Randy Savage versus Scott Norton. So like you said, they put him in a pretty big spot as a debut on Nitro to step in the ring with Savage.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd forgot this was how they debuted Norton. But a lot of hype behind him coming in, and they threw him right to the wolves when it came to the big push right off the bat. So interesting
Absolutely.
to see what'll come with Scott Norton in the next couple of weeks here on Nitro.
So with the next commercial break that they had, it looks like we got to see a Sabu promo, which I was like all excited for. However, it was missing something. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more? How you felt?
Yeah, I thought the promo itself was actually just aesthetically. I thought it was way too all over the place, too many trails and too many effects. It was too much. But for the meat of the bones, the meat and the bones of it, it was just it didn't give you a real good idea of who Sabu was or why he was there.
Absolutely.
But for people who knew who he was, it was a huge tease. So I could see on both ends, but they were assuming too many people knew who he was.
Right, and we see that now with AEW, of course, with all their guys that they bring in left and right, or maybe like a Kenny Omega, or like a Scott Norton, you could say, who had success in Japan, but nobody really knows who they are, in America, except for maybe the hardcore fans.
Sure.
So after the Sabu promo, which like I said, I got kind of excited about, the first Nitro ever, we see a Sabu promo. Was there ever going to be a point where we were going to see Sabu kind of like in a main event place where we would have him and say Hogan or say Randy Savage? Do you think that ever would have happened? Because he was a top guy, obviously, in ECW, former champion.
It's an interesting point to ponder for sure. And I guess this will be the first one we'll throw out to you guys. What do you think? Where was Sabu's ceiling? Was he always just going to be a mid-card attraction guy with the table spots and the hardcore? Was that in itself what Sabu was all about? Or was there more to him? Was he able to get over to a top guy level? I could have saw it. If you pushed him the right way, I definitely could have seen a run. I don't know about the top guy run, but I could have seen him in there with a Savage. I thought that would have been a cool match.
That would definitely be a cool match. I mean, we saw a little bit of it when the ECW had come over the second time after the first one-night stand that they did, and they kind of pushed Sabu in a pretty big role, surprisingly, with Vince. He had a short little feud with John Cena, which was the top of the top there, the cream of the crop. So, yeah, certainly as far as technical wrestling and as far as a drawing mystique that he had about him, I think he probably could have seen a better run than he certainly deserved anyway than he got in WCW. But
right.
I guess, one of those things where coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Right. Well, from there, we saw the re-debut, I guess, the return of Michael Wall Street, the former IRS.
Yeah,
not my favorite promo. I gotta say, I love the character itself of the snobby rich man. That always is going to get over, but I don't know. Michael Wall Street, he kind of lost me on the promo style. It was bland. It was very meh. I was whatever on it.
Yeah, see, and I felt that it was kind of something that maybe he didn't really get to do much of in WWF. Yeah, he had his little IRS promos and whatnot, but I thought it was a solid promo. I thought his pacing was really good. I thought he hit on some good points, and it was cool to hear him throw in a little IRS hint. I think he had thrown something in there about looking into his finances or something. So it was kind of like a little jab maybe at WWF. Sure. So yeah, I thought it was kind of cool.
Sure, no, I agree. Let's see, where did we go from there?
Main event time.
Well, yeah, indeed it was, but I wanted to throw in a quick note that we're overlooking is that at this point in WCW's where they were going with things was, with this being the first Nitro, Saturday night was still a big deal. They still had big time guys and big time matches on the Saturday night show. I think that gets overlooked when you watch the Monday Night Wars documentary on WWE, or you listen to their revisionist history of how things happened. They make it sound like right off the bat Nitro was it, and it was the war, week one, this was it. They still had a lot of other things going on, so this was a big time transitional period. But they were pushing Saturday night. You were going to see Sting, you were going to see this guy, Luger. Interesting time. But yeah, but with that said, into the main event, Hogan and Big Bubba Rogers, the old big boss man. In 1995, is this what we want to see?
I mean, you certainly got to see it a lot in 88 through 89, the Twin Towers. Yeah. I mean, it was like, something you wouldn't pay big money for a pay-per-view for back then, especially. But I think what we're seeing with this show is Nitro wanted to cram in a lot of things, and certainly we didn't finish all of what they crammed in. But they're trying to get their world champion on TV. They're trying to get some kind of a familiar name, against him. I guess Bubba Rogers, even though everyone knows him as the Big Boss Man. Familiar face, I should say. We saw Luger, we saw Anderson, we saw Savage, we saw the Cruiserweights. So they're really trying to throw a lot at us. So yeah, it certainly wasn't a great match by any means.
Right. And I guess I would assume, to play devil's advocate to my own point, is the only thing they're thinking is it's not really going to involve Bubba in the end with all the run-ins and the other big names coming in, because you got Luger and Sting and everybody coming back out, and it came into the big scuffle at the end with Hogan and Luger standing in each other's faces, shouting for 5 minutes, waiting until somebody got a mic, and then they talk. But anyway, but the point was, there was a lot more going on at the end of the main event than the main event itself. So in a way, I guess the match set up for the aftermath of and setting up for the future.
Sure.
So
going back to your other point, I think at this point we really start to see, and I certainly saw it with my own eyes in 1992 Rumble, the greatest Rumble of all time. I was there. We started to hear the crowd kind of turn on Hogan already, and some boos. I saw a Hogan sucks sign in the crowd during this match, and especially when Luger came out and they met face to face. Luger being more of the homegrown WCW guy. Luger's had been in the company previous to this for many years, and Hogan was the Northerner working for Vince. It was probably doubly hard for him to get over. It only made sense, and it would be a matter of time and foreshadowing here to turn him, because you really seen the staleness and kind of hard to win over that crowd.
I would say just starting though. It wasn't blatant. Like I would say since we were looking for it, you saw it, but I didn't see it so much on like a main scale where you'd even really be concerned yet. If I was a booker, I wouldn't. I think it was still okay, because keep in mind we're still essentially a year away from black and white NWO Hollywood Hogan. We still had a long road of Dungeon of Doom bullshit, and like there was still a lot of red and yellow left that they pushed on us whether we wanted it or not. So I don't think the pushback was there yet. But by this time next year rolled around, it was time, and they pulled the trigger in the right way. But I don't think it was time yet. I think unless you were in our age group that said Pasta Mania, what is this corny shit? Because then maybe, like that goes back to the point I was making earlier. Was Pasta Mania was so corny? Like maybe it was time to get away from it, but maybe not. I don't know. I would say it was the beginning of it, but it wasn't full blown. It wasn't full blown 50-50. Cena sucks. Let's go Cena yet.
You know what though? When I was and I'm going to go back to it because I was there live and definitely back. If you listen to the tape in 1992, 3 years prior to this, the final three in the Rumble was Ric Flair, Psycho Sid, Sid Vicious, Sid Justice at the time, and Hulk Hogan. When Sid had taken Hogan out of the match, or when Sid was eliminated from the match, the crowd was overwhelmingly for Sid. I mean, certainly there were the little John Cena fans with the little Hulk dolls, which was probably me. Right. But you heard a split in the crowd, and you already heard the boos, and certainly there was a lot of cheers for Sid, a new face, a younger guy, something different. I think by this time his act had gone really stale. The only thing that kept him from getting extremely stale was the fact that he would disappear for a while and do a movie. His look had changed. He certainly was off the gas by this point. He was not the big jacked Hulkamania, from the 80s that we were used to seeing here. That's one of the first things you'll notice with Hogan. But I thought that he had grown already pretty stale by this point, especially if we were hearing boos back in 92.
Sure. No, I can't argue the point, but I think unless you were looking for it, I don't think it was as blatant as what we see today with Cena, if we're comparing the one to the other. But
yeah, I mean, it was definitely WCW is going to milk that cow for every penny that it was worth, and obviously the red and yellow, they were going to milk that for a while. Kind of a weird pairing with him and Jimmy Hart, I thought.
Yeah, I never
being a babyface.
Right, I never cared for Jimmy as a babyface, but at that point. They were traveling together anyways, and I'm not sure. I think it was even by Hogan's request that they did that, but no, it didn't. It never made any sense either, especially since Jimmy had spent the early part of his career just much like Bobby Heenan, essentially trying to kill Hulkamania, and then just for the hell of it, he he's with him now. Okay, but I don't know. I didn't care for that either.
Right. Well, I guess to wrap up the show there, we could also pose a question to you guys along with the Sabu question. Do you think Sabu would have been a top guy? Do you think Hogan's act had gone stale at this point? Do you think that it was time to turn the red and yellow? But keep in mind that was not something that was typical to happen. You know what I mean? When Hogan turned NWO, we're getting ahead of ourselves here, but that was something that just didn't happen. Bruno Sammartino was not going to turn babyface. You know what I mean? Someone like Ric Flair, maybe Roddy Piper, you would have seen, but typically you didn't see a big top name like that. John Cena to this day has never turned heel. So just to put a little wrap up on this show, we see Mean Gene get in the ring after the match, after the Dungeon of Goons run in, who looked terrible coming in. It looked like a circus act coming in the ring.
Yeah, they were. That was an outcast of oddities, if ever there was one.
So who did we see? We saw Beefcake, who was...
Yeah, Beefcake, Earthquake.
A lot of cakes and quakes. Kamala, Kevin Sullivan.
Well past their prime. Dungeon of Doom was not a quality angle by any means.
So we see Mean Gene get in the ring with Hogan and Luger as they're shouting back and forth at each other. Hogan's asking him, "What's he doing here?" Kind of an intense interview. I thought, they're going to have. They want to bring you back for next week, so they posed that match for next week already. So I assume that'll be next week's main event. Right. I thought that this could have been drawn out a little bit more and made into a big pay-per-view match, even, especially with Luger just coming back. Do some more promos with Luger. Obviously, Luger was not a great promo guy, but you could have built this a little bit more between these two guys.
Yes and no. You got to keep in mind, with this being an unopposed first edition of Nitro, and knowing what they're setting themselves up for going head to head, you're changing the landscape. From this moment on, squash matches, jobber matches were done, essentially, or slowly building to that point where you had to beat the other guy on the other channel, so you had to put out a bigger match. And this was just essentially the start of that. You could have built it for 3 weeks till your pay-per-view, but when you want to make sure you're going to get the upper hand next week, you got something to look forward to. Raw had the dog show. You don't know what they're going to have next week. Who cares? Next week's Hogan Luger. I'm coming back. That was their thinking. I think it paid off.
Sure.
I think it was a good idea for what the strategy was. If long term, whether or not it was a good idea, I don't know. Long term, probably push for the pay-per-view and get the pay-per-view money on build and build interest. But short term and what they were trying to do, I think it was smart.
Sure. It definitely is going to bring you back for next week. I agree with that. So right now, at this point, WCW is throwing a lot of big names at you. A lot of money, I'm sure, being spent, and they're throwing in the Hogans, the Flairs, the Stings, the Lugers, Savage. So we're seeing all these guys, real big names. So a little bit different than what we're going to see in the next show we're going to talk about, which is ECW Hardcore TV, which is the following day, September 5th, 1995. So I'll let you take it away here as we open up the Hardcore TV show.
Sure. And right off the bat, you see the quality is not what you see today. It's very grainy footage, and it's just, it goes to show how different things are with high def HD quality and 5K this and that. It's a real change of pace. And it's almost like a mom and pop organization. It's very gritty, nitty gritty. But we see Big Val Puccio and the full-blooded Italians. The FBI have been a great stable in ECW throughout the time throughout the whole tenure of ECW. This, however, was not the best incarnation of the FBI. KG, what do you think about Big Val Puccio?
Oh my God! So later we get to see some of the other big Italian guys, like Big Guido, who was a monster, and Big Sal, who could move a little bit in the ring. But this guy was just, oh man! So we see him sitting at ringside, stuffing his face with cannolis. He's got to be about 5. He's got to be about 5 by 5. Yeah, the big cannolis. The one that one is like this big. Right. So he's sitting there sucking those down with a match between JT Smith and Hack Myers. The crowd, you can tell right away, is very different than what we're seeing. The crowd is very hot, very intense. We have remember the Raven guy that we called the Raven guy in the crowd?
There was a handful them that were there.
There was a guy that I think me and you called a while back, was like the Raven guy. He looked like Raven, and he was standing ringside, and he's just giving the stare in the ring, like, I don't know if he's coked out of his mind or what, but he's giving this ring, this look like he's going to get in there. So anyway, you see this is a different crowd. This is a mostly male dominant crowd, a hostile crowd, a hungry crowd, that'll eat you up if you screw anything up in the match. They're certainly not going to listen to no Pasta Mania. So the crowd is very hot. You notice that. I noticed one of the first things I noticed. The other thing I really noticed was the very loose ropes. The ropes were like, I mean, if you went like this, the thing would have bounced for 20 minutes. I mean, it was really, so totally different from what we're seeing from this to Nitro. Not to downplay it in any way. The crowd was certainly much better, but Big Val, I'm sorry, I keep calling him Big Sal because of Sally Graziano a little bit later on. But so at one point he gets in the ring. Do you want to talk about that? And this is worth, if you're not going to go back and watch what we're talking about here, go back and just watch this match for this particular moment.
Sure. There comes a spot where Big Val gets in for an assist, double team. And he does the big splash, the big fat man splash. Now, that would have been great and all if he wasn't wearing a windbreaker that was 2 sizes too big, even though he was already 1,000 pounds to begin with. So the windbreaker does a fly flop while he's in midair and covers his whole head. So he comes down and he looks like the Headless Horseman. A hilarious spot if you're watching it. I would agree. If you're going to watch one segment of what we're talking about, of the 2 hours worth of footage, it would be the beginning of W, September 6th or 5th, I think. That was
September 5th. Yep.
That was funny. That was
great. So
the athleticism of the big man. It's off the chart.
Oh, Jesus. He had the fat guy issue where, like when a big fat guy gets up or sits down and they pull their shirt down, because their tummy's going to stick out.
Yeah, so that all show. Come on.
Okay, thanks for the demonstration. But so this is what happened with the windbreaker when it went up. He was like, "Oh, and we'll just pull that down," and okay, and it just looked so bad. It looked so bad. So weird finish to the match. However, I thought it was kind of strange. JT Smith and Hack Myers, not to take away from the match because it was a decent match, but I just couldn't get over Big Fat Val, and so a count out. So ECW count out rules were 20. Was it 20 count?
Actually, I don't even remember hearing a count. I just remember hearing the bell at some point. So I don't remember if it was 10 or 20. I couldn't tell you their standard rule set of count out because that was the first and only one I'd ever seen. It blew me away when I watched it back the other day that there even was a count out. I never saw that. I never was aware they had count outs. But the match really didn't matter either way. So I guess neither did the finish. So.
No, definitely not. So after the end of this match here has ended out in a count out, I guess a count out victory for JT Smith, right, and Big Val.
Yeah.
So after we saw his head get lost in his jacket, so there's a couple actually. This is a pretty important episode in the history of ECW. And before we get to the next angle, we should touch upon the fact that the week before this. Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko, probably the 2 best wrestlers ever to step foot inside an ECW ring, arguably, had just left for WCW. So this was a really big moment.
Right. The week before, they had their epic 2 out of 3 falls match. You saw grown men in the crowd crying after the match. That's how legitimate emotion. That's how much a legitimate emotion there was for those 2 leaving. And it goes to the whole aspect of this show. What we're doing is the week-to-week aspect because you're going to see these guys pop up in a week or 2 on Nitro. I forget when their exact debut date was, but you saw the end of them, the end of their ECW tenure. And then you saw them fly up north, or I guess down south from that point, Philly to Atlanta. But
this is east-west connection. The north-south thing doesn't matter.
South doesn't. Yeah. Too much directions that throws me off. But so it's definitely an important piece of ECW history because those guys represented the anti-ECW. To me, they're what made ECW so great was that it wasn't just tables and hardcore and flames and barbed wire. That was the image that WWF and WCW tried pushing was that garbage hardcore shit. But no, there was the best technical, the best flying, the best hardcore, the best brawling. It was a mix of the best of everything. So to me, I remember being really bummed when those guys left. Yeah, for sure. I remember being really bummed when those guys left.
That's looking back at ECW is going to give me a good perspective too, because obviously I don't think either one of us in '95, maybe through tapes we had gone back and watched some of these segments. Certainly the next segment and the 2 out of 3 falls match. But it's going to go back and see that it wasn't just a hardcore bloodbath every night. You had the Eddie Guerreros, the Dean Malenkos, the Rey Mysterios, the Chris Benoits, the Rob Van Dams, and then you had guys like Sandman and stuff that were going to bleed buckets in the ring, and Terry Funk and whoever. And the angles, the dramatic angles, and the great booking that we've seen from the genius Paul Heyman, which takes us into our next segment here with Paul Heyman and of course, referee Bill Alfonso. So I wrote down this was great. This was a great promo. This is a classic promo to go back and watch and just really enjoy it. Really, you want to give some history here, what we can look back on here and kind of get a little backstory.
Right. What was going on was, ECW being such a small promotion and running the rinky-dink arenas in Philadelphia, you had your bingo halls, and that was like the running joke back then. But going along with that came the stricter athletic commissions. You couldn't bleed, you couldn't go in the crowd, you couldn't go over the guardrails, little things like that. So if you're a fan that's smart to that kind of stuff, the athletic commission's already a heel to you, you know what I mean? So they bring in Bill Alfonso. He's a former WWF official when they still had the bow tie, and I'm gonna call it right down the middle, Daddy. They turned that into a gimmick. He was, instead of just being a referee, he was the referee from the athletic commission, and they made a great heel character out of him. They milked it for a while, until he actually ended up having a charge. He ended up going with Taz at first, and then RVD and Sabu. But even just for now, he was against everybody. He hated everybody. This extreme shit. It was a great angle. So yeah, they milked it. Actually, they milked it a little too long in this segment. I thought it went a little too long, but the angle was fucking great, and the crowd was hot.
So the angle actually ends with Fonzie smashing Paul E with the big Zach Morris cell phone that he was known for carrying back then, that big brick phone, which he used in WCW as well. So rather than seeing Heyman whack somebody with it, he gets whacked with his own phone. During this, we see Todd Gordon, who is back, Commissioner Todd Gordon, who is actually in the crowd, and we can see him with the one camera that they had, the hard camera, right. What's that?
Top of the bleachers, yeah.
He's standing at the top of the bleachers, and he actually runs into the ring and gets involved and flopping around like a fish with Fonzie, and they're really going at it. I mean, like, it looks legit. From there, we see 911 come out, and apparently he was not allowed to, because of the athletic commission that you had touched upon. He was Bill Alfonso had stated he was not allowed to choke slam anybody, which was Paulie's kind of bodyguard, I guess, that came in and handled business because he was a big freaking dude. You wanted to touch on that a little bit with anything to add? I feel like I'm talking too long. I don't want to go through the whole angle.
I was letting you finish up. No, you're right. So the big build was to finally seeing that 911 choke slam, and they built it perfectly. The crowd was hot for it the whole time. But like I said, I thought it ran just a little long, but they finally got it. So, but from there we moved into, let's see, I have a Sandman segment. Now, Sandman in '95 was a controversial figure. I dug it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed him and Woman together. Woman definitely, as we've seen with some of the dark side of the ring things, very underrated as a manager, as a talent, and she looked great. You definitely got like this evil vibe from her and Sandman. Sandman giving those stares into the camera when he comes out with the cigarettes, and I mean, it was almost eerie, and you got this whole persona and the whole vibe of Sandman just coming out and doing his thing without saying a word, without doing anything, just coming out with a cigarette, and you're just like, whoa, and you were just sucked right in with him.
Sure.
And it was him. The actual match was him versus, was it Mikey?
Yeah. Yep.
Yes, him versus Mikey.
The ending of that segment or match, when they go back and forth from clip to match to segment. But yeah, this was the end of the segment.
Right. They were jumping. Yes, they were jumping around because we went to ECW Fan Cam. So this was kind of where they did their rewind, where they did their recap. So we see Sandman, we see Mikey, who actually canes the Sandman. And then another segment that they jumped to on ECW Fan Cam is New Jack stabbing Johnny Grunge. Sandman helps the Gangsters against Public Enemy, who is them and the Gangsters were having quite the feud around this time, which I'm sure we'll see in the coming weeks. And then Mikey had come in, and a different segment Mikey had come in to make the save for Public Enemy.
Yeah, good stuff there. But not much to the meat of the bones of it. It's moving along. We had Raven and Stevie as the tag team champs at that point in a feud with the Pitbulls. Pitbull 1, Pitbull 2, intimidating dudes, to say the least.
Probably at this point, they were way over. I mean, when you hear these guys come out and you hear the crowd, even with the stupid canned WWE Network, which we watched it through, the canned music and the canned kind of sounds. I mean, these guys were over big time. They were the tag team. No, I'm sorry. Raven and Richards were the tag team champions. Right. So we got to kind of see all the belts as far as this goes. As far as we saw Sandman, even though it was Fan Cam, he was the world champion at this time. I don't know if I mentioned that. And the ECW tag champions, Raven and Stevie Richards versus the Pitbulls, which is the main event of the evening. So what did you think about the match?
I liked it, but at the same time, it's the same generic brawl you're going to get from the Pitbulls. No selling, a lot of no selling, and a lot of table spots and tease table spots. But I'm always a big Raven fan, so there's always something to pull out that's enjoyable from a match like this. I thought.
Sure. We saw the dynamic between Raven and Richards, which was really funny and really cool. Something that ECW or WCW used later on with the flock and everything, the cult, whatever you want to call it. So we saw Raven actually throw his tag partner to the Wolves, to the Pitbulls, actually, which kind of reminded me of throwing him to the Wolves. We saw something that we would not see probably on any other television show, and that would be the fan interaction. So we saw a crutch and a chair that was handed to the Pitbulls to whack either Richards or Raven with. I don't remember which. So that's something we didn't see on any show. The fans bringing weapons and handing them to the talent, to the wrestlers.
Sure, that was part of the unique atmosphere to ECW. But unfortunately, that also lent itself to the image of hardcore is all we know and blood and guts, and so it came with its positive and negatives. But if you were in that fan base, and it was something special. But at the same time, if you look at it from an outsider view, the fans are just as barbaric as the wrestlers. What is this? So it came with its positives and negatives. But I thought it was a great touch to the intimate feel of the ECW family. That fan base was so rabid, and in such a small building. I've been to the arena plenty of times in Philly, and just to see a small building like that packed to the gills. And the emotion, the raw emotion, it's one of a kind to feel that or to see it, So, and like you had just touched on too, it sucks to see the canned entrances on the WWE version of stuff. So if you have the tapes, feel free to go back and watch them that way, because you can't beat the original, the White Zombie and the Sandman, the Metallica stuff.
Sandman, right?
It's hard to duplicate, but. If the network's all you got, then you'll get the gist of what's going on there.
Especially when you see a guy like you had mentioned with Sandman or New Jack, where their entrance was almost bigger than the match because of how interactive and the music, and it was just, I mean, it was a freaking, I've been to plenty of them. It was a freaking rock concert. It was heavy metal. It was intense, and the people that were there were just hungry for blood and for action and good wrestling as well, not just gore, blood and gore. You know what I mean?
Right. And then we finished off the episode with a Cactus Jack promo that was beautiful. It was awesome. It was so deep. You had to think about it as he was talking, and then later on it clicked where he was going with it. It was one of those, like, it really built. There was a story behind it. He didn't just come out yelling, "Hulk Hogan, I'm gonna beat you." It was. That's too generic. Foley was a thinker. He was a thinker. You had to follow along with him, but it was beautiful. was good stuff. It was the Uncle Willie promo. If you
So
want to
the
check that out.
uncle, the Uncle Willie promo, who was a Vietnam War veteran, and it's funny because I remember Mick Foley, Cactus Jack, at this point, um, referring to these family members of his and the other promos, and he always has a weird Uncle Willie or somebody that he's gonna, and you hear him start to spin off and talk about Uncle Willie, and you're like, how the hell is this gonna tie into Tommy Dreamer? Who he's talking about in this promo, and
Right.
somehow he manages it to come full circle and come around when he's talking about anti-USA and baby killers and his Uncle Willie, who was a Vietnam vet. It was definitely a great promo.
Yeah.
A lot of passion, certainly a lot of passion, a lot of intensity. I mean, those Cactus Jack ECW promos, hard to beat as far as I'm concerned. As far as all-time great promos.
Right. I had here on my notes. I had Justified Psycho, and that's exactly what it was. It was you feel like your favorite movie, or your favorite villains. Sometimes the Joker, that kind of stuff. You go to that.
Yeah.
Is what's beautiful about their character is that they're a villain and they're evil, but they believe they're doing something good or something righteous. And that's what Foley was at this point in his career. He was that like demented, beautiful psycho. Like there was just something beautiful about how demented he was, and his promos showed. So that was a great way to close the show. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. So as we look back and tie in the notes from the show, like I said, WCW threw a lot of big names at you, and at this point, ECW is not necessarily at war with WWF or WCW. They were probably never seen as up there with them as far as mainstream notoriety. Certainly for quality, they would be up there, a show quality. But we definitely seen a lot more drama from ECW with their promos, like we mentioned with Paul Heyman and Fonzie, the promo with Cactus Jack, and it seemed to be more captivating. It seemed to be more of, this is real, where WCW was still in a stage where it was very, I don't even know, not clunky, but very like corny, I guess.
Yeah,
corny and all over the place. Yeah.
No, I agree, and because I had touched on it before, it was a transitional period for them where they didn't know if they wanted Saturday night to be the show, or they didn't know how much they were going to put into Nitro, if they were going to go all balls in and put 100% into it. So they were still finding themselves, and that showed at points. A lot of things were on point with like Liger and Pillman and where they wanted to go with that division. But they had all the main event guys, so you had to cram them in, and like you said, they were just throwing a lot at the wall and seeing what was going to stick and what seemed like it was going to get some buzz for the next week.
Sure, definitely. So I think when we take a look at next week's show, obviously we'll have Raw in there. So we'll have 3 shows we'll be looking at. I know if you guys want to follow along with us, it sounds like a lot. But at this point, Nitro is only 45 minutes when you cut out the commercials. If you want to watch it through the network, and I'm sure there's stuff on YouTube, or even if you want to just touch upon some of the segments that we talk about, whether it be Big Val with his jacket, or if you want to go back and watch the cactus, the classic cactus. That's hard to say.
Easy for you.
The classic cactus promo, if you want to go back and watch that, certainly, from September 5th, 1995, definitely worth watching. So if you want to go right through, we're going to watch 3 shows. But like I said, at this point, WCW is only, Nitro is only an hour show. Hardcore TV is only an hour show. And Raw is a 2-hour show.
Still 2 at this point for another couple of years, I think.
I don't think they ever went to 3 until way later, right? Because they were still doing 2 when Nitro was doing 3.
Right, you're right. I think Nitro. You're right. Yeah, Nitro did go to 3 first, and then actually it might even be until way later on when Raw went to 3.
Well,
but anyway, we'll do some research. We'll find out. But for now, you only have maybe 4 hours tops of stuff to look for. 3.5 hours. But on quarantine, what do you have to lose? And that's if you want to do that as a follow up to this show.
Exactly. And this era, even going back and reliving it and seeing some of the moments, you're kind of going to go back and see, wow, I had never realized this, or maybe like, wow, this wasn't as cool as I thought it was when I was 15 years old, or whatever it was, or what, you know what I mean? But we're trying to take a perspective of this is, we're going to try to put ourselves back in time when this happened. Yes, we know this angle was redone years later or whatever. But I think it's important to look at it from that perspective of, this is 95. This is not 2020.
Right, this is 25 years ago. So
sounds.
there's going to be subtle differences in the way broadcasting is done and the way people just do things. So it's an interesting contrast to watch wrestling today to what we're trying to delve into here. So.
And no matter what show you put on at this point, I think this was probably some of the best television wrestling that you were going to get, that you were going to see, whether it be ECW, Hardcore TV, Nitro, or Raw. They were all starting to build here. We're seeing the groundwork for Nitro being laid with their big names and big stars. We're seeing some of the dramatic angles that ECW is going to be using. And I think this is when WWE starts to fall behind and start to become corny, kind of like WCW. But WCW now has the name value of the Savages and the Hogans, and they're going to start to slowly pull away. So it's kind of interesting to look at that dynamic, knowing what the outcome is going to be and saying, well, why did WCW do this? Or what took WWE or F so long to get on point with, like, hey, what you guys are doing isn't working, and then the great stuff that was completely overlooked in ECW. So I think it's, going down a trip down memory lane, as I put in the post, is pretty cool. And I think there's stuff that you're going to notice that you certainly did not notice 25 years ago. I know, at least I have, just watching these two shows.
Yeah, for sure. It should be a very interesting trip down memory lane. So, I thank you guys for joining us. And like I said in our introductory video, we're open to criticisms or some helpful tips if you have any tips for us. But I think we're finding our groove, and upward and onward for some good episodes coming ahead. So thank you guys for joining us. KG, I'll let you finish up.
Yep. Stay tuned with some poll questions. Once again, do you feel Hulk Hogan had become stale at this point? This is 1995, September of 1995. Would Sabu have made good main event talent on WCW Nitro, big name value? And was there a third one, or was that it?
I think we're going to stick with those two for this week.
Excellent. All right, so we'll stick with those two. We'll have some poll questions. Look forward to your guys' interactions and thoughts on the show. Thanks again for stopping by. This is the East-West Wrestling Connection. All right, we should do it. So I say East, you say West. I say, we can go back and forth here.
It's the East-West Connection Wrestling Podcast, folks. It's not that hard. It's not that difficult.